implementing the state's pandemic response for the K through 12 schools. Jackie began her career as a middle school ELA teacher and has since spent time as a school administrator, serving as the Indianapolis Mayor's Office of Education Innovation, working for an education nonprofit, and as an education consultant, supporting organizations with talent planning and development strategy. Jackie, we're so pleased to have you. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd want to add before we jump in?
Yes, thank you, Jess. The other couple of things I would just add is that I am a mother of 2 small children who are in very capable hands right now, but I've heard a couple of explosions in the last 20 minutes. So in case you do hear some background noise, they are being tended to and are generally very happy children. And I am the mother of 2 large fur children. I have 2 dogs who often introduce themselves in Zoom meetings. So in the event you do get to meet them tonight, be aware of that as well. But I am very happy to be here. I'm very passionate about the work that I do now and education in general. And so any opportunity I have to talk about it is always really fun for me. And more importantly, any opportunity I have to talk to folks with different perspectives and who ask really hard, great questions, I find just sharpens my thinking and is just really helpful in the work that I do. So thank you to those of you who made it tonight. Thank you to those who invited me tonight. And I'm excited to hear what's on your mind.
Awesome. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for those heads up. Okay, so let's start by just making sure we're on the same page here. First of all, can you just explain what DESE is and give a quick overview with your role within DESE and generally what initiatives you've been working on since COVID started?
Sure. So at a high level, DESE is a state education agency, which similar to other SEAs across the country, typically engages in some version of making policy, monitoring compliance with state and federal laws, researching and promoting evidence-based practices across schools, providing technical assistance in various areas, and then the big one to issue general and targeted funding. At DESE within Massachusetts, we have around 450 staff members represented in several multi-function or content-specific centers. My position and my role when I joined the agency back in 2019 is situated within the Center for Strategic Initiatives, which is led by Senior Associate Commissioner Ventura Rodriguez. And a fun note that this center was actually created by our current commissioner, Jeff Riley, when he took on his role as state commissioner a few years ago. And this center specifically was established to identify, design, and pilot different strategies that advance educational equity in Massachusetts, particularly for students who are traditionally or currently underserved. And so my current role as the director of remote learning, is probably the most strategic initiative type role that I have ever come across and really emerged as a direct result of COVID and the extended school closures. So I was really charged to help DESE and our schools and districts navigate the complex world that we're all living in right now. I think it's really important to emphasize that I was not and am not in charge of everything remote learning across the state. As I mentioned, we have over 400 people and all of them are focused on schools in various capacities and had to shift to adopt a remote learning lens, including special education, English learners, early education, curriculum and instruction, et cetera. And so a large part of my work has been to coordinate and collaborate across all of these teams to get a sense of what remote learning looked like, what specific questions and challenges we were seeing across the state, and really collectively problem solving wherever possible. And whenever I can't answer a question, knowing who in the agency is better positioned to answer those questions. And aside from that part of my role, I was really charged with three main buckets of new work that emerged because of COVID. The first of which being addressing the challenges of the digital divide, developing developing guidance in accordance to emergency regulations. So figuring out essentially how we do school in the midst of a global pandemic, clarifying what was required, what was expected, what was recommended, what was prohibited in the midst of all of this new stuff coming out. And then deploying and identifying relevant resources and supports throughout the year to do our best to make sure that we were listening to what the challenges were and also providing some supports where possible.
Wow, that is a lot of work. Thank you so much for sharing that. The next question we wanted to address was, what racial and economic concerns did you guys see when it came to digital learning?
Yeah, so similar to any education institution and really any institution, the economic and specifically racial concerns around digital learning are deep and very complex, and much more so than I could attempt to cover in a fireside chat tonight. But things like equitable funding, access to high quality educators, access to rigorous academics, culturally responsive practices, these are all things that existed long before the pandemic and the need for remote learning, and certainly came along with it. So none of those were new to us, but we knew they existed before and certainly still saw them. The one thing specifically that was much more elevated than before was around the digital divide. Most of our schools and districts have been at least partially fully remote for a portion of this school year. However, many of our larger urban districts have been remote for a much more substantial part of the year. Some of them haven't been in school buildings since March 15th, a year ago. And what this means is that for many of our students from lower income communities and our students of color, their only option for attending school, much if not all of this year, was through a computer. When we surveyed districts last spring, we projected that somewhere around 15% of our students didn't have access to a personal computer that they could use for remote learning, and around 8% didn't have reliable internet at home to use the computer to connect with their teachers and their classmates. And then zooming in, when we looked at our gateway cities, which house more of our low-income communities and our students of color, those numbers almost doubled. So we're seeing higher concentration of that lack of access in populations where we know are traditionally underserved. So to immediately step in here, over the summer, we did stand up a nearly $32 million grant to go directly towards purchasing devices and internet packages for students, and made it clear that this was a non-negotiable. And one of the expectations heading into the fall was that access to a computer and internet could not be a barrier to students going to school this year. Every district that applied received some of that funding, but again, in order to focus in on issues of equity, we did award a higher percentage of funding to communities with less access to local wealth and essentially tax money from their community. I do want to note too that this $33 million supplemented the nearly $40 million that these districts had already spent since March to address this very specific need, and doesn't get close to touching the money that they have spent since then to make sure that this wasn't an issue for their students. So I think that's, one of the clearest ways that equity presented itself immediately at the beginning of the year. And we know that the digital divide still has its barriers, but I think is one of the quickest pivots and moves that we were able to make immediately to address what we saw as both a non-negotiable and something that is fairly readily fixed.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It aligns so well with what I saw on the ground level of just trying to get kids access to Comcast, and especially ELL learners, special ed learners, who there's so many barriers to just calling Comcast and getting internet. That funding definitely helped with some of those barriers, at least. All right, anywho, okay, next question. We're going to shift to the teacher perspective now. How have pre-K through 12 teachers pivoted to support their teachers online? What have you seen? What's been working? What hasn't been? Is there anything that helped in that transition?
Yeah, so I'm not quite as on the ground with our educators as some of the others in the agency are. So I don't know that I'll be able to speak as detailed about this, but some of the observations that we have made so far this year, unsurprising, but building relationships with students has been one of the most important aspects of having a manageable and, dare I say, successful year in the midst of all of the challenges that we're experiencing. And so, I think that's one thing that was really striking very early on. Is it was very easy to see instances where this has always been a priority in certain classrooms, in certain schools, and certain districts and systems. And, not just with the students, but with the families as well. And where our school systems had strong systems for engaging students, engaging families, and communicating, they may still have experienced and did experience a lot of challenges, but their ability to pivot, to shift, to address those challenges went much more smoothly than in places where those may not have been as strong. And so, we did see very quickly the need to push and to communicate that this needs to be an immediate priority in order to accomplish much of anything this year. So building relationships has really been foundational. Again, unsurprising. I will say one of the also less surprising, but something that was a bigger challenge in a lot of our districts was access to technology and having a technology infrastructure. Very few of our districts were one-to-one, where every student had a district issued device prior to the pandemic, which meant that, in many of our districts, educators weren't using technology frequently, or if they were, it was really self-led and self-driven, but not really built into the fabric of the schools, for better or worse. No judgment on that, but obviously then shifting really overnight to becoming a virtual school. Those schools and districts obviously had a much harder time versus those that really had that infrastructure built out on the front end and could much more quickly adapt. And then the last thing I will say is that in any sector over this past year, one of the skill sets that has truly been a huge asset, and we've seen this in educators as well, is your willingness and ability to pivot. And to try new things and to learn on the fly with students. And, we've seen this as a very powerful strategy, both at maintaining sanity for our teachers, but also in modeling for our students this year that nobody has the right answer. Nobody knows what they're doing right now, but we're all doing the best that we can, and we're going to give it a shot. And if it doesn't work perfectly, which it probably won't, we'll try again tomorrow. And so I think that is a hard attitude to adopt if it's not your normal. And so, especially I think some of our more veteran teachers who are used to being really great at the way that they're doing things and had to pivot again overnight. without that spirit, I think it has been really hard, and is something that I hope we promote more so heading into next year and beyond, because I think it also allowed our educators to uncover some really great new skill sets and resources and opportunities to connect with kids.
Yeah, so interesting to hear what's happening on the macroscopic level. Definitely saw that on the teacher level. And one of the most interesting things I've seen with, I work in a low income Title I school, and a lot of things that were surprising were kids didn't know how to control C. They didn't know, like, just little shortcuts, which makes sense because they didn't have access to one-on-one devices or internet at home. But it's just really interesting how we live in such a digital world. And when you see the lack of skills, it's been really informative, I think, for teachers as well, and helpful to be able to have the resources now to help address that gap. So
yeah, I think on that too, the tech support, I mean, again, most of our districts weren't one-to-one. And so, it's been a criticism for the last several years that as a state, even though we have, arguably one of the most technology savvy populace, that this has been mirrored in our schools. And so a lot of our districts had to develop tech support teams, some of them with like one person on the tech staff, and that person is also part-time business manager. And so we did see teachers and school staff and district staff get really creative and just really great at figuring out ways to support students and families in how to access that technology. Getting the devices, getting connected to the internet's one thing, but how to use it effectively is something altogether. So I've been really impressed with how quickly, they've been able to put that together. So hats off to you and your team, Jess.
So many levels. Oh my goodness. All right. Well, kind of going off the direction you were about to head in, what about remote learning should be leveraged when kids are back in school? What do you think about that?
I mean, there are a lot of really cool digital learning opportunities heading into next year. Many of the applications, the programs we mass tested this year, I think can be really powerful tools to offer a much more personalized, relevant, rigorous, flexible learning experience for students. What you learn, when you learn, how you learn it, all of which will be really important to addressing the truly varied need for students that I think we'll see next year. But I think some of the more powerful lessons from remote learning have less to do with technology itself and much more in how we approached things this year. Now, I mentioned that building relationships was perhaps the most critical factor in success this year. And I think we need to continue to acknowledge that it's always been the most critical factor in success of a school year. That family communication and engagement is something that we might have actually improved this year. I don't know if everybody felt that or feels that in the moment, but being on site wasn't a requirement for parent-teacher conferences or for participating in school committee meetings. Families needed regular updates on student progress, schedules, assignments, and educators needed to rely on families as partners this year. It's required a lot of effort on everybody's part. But I really hope that everybody, our educators, our school systems, and our families really see that as a massive opportunity for improving our student experiences from here on out. So technology is cool. You will hear more from me about promoting that heading into next year. But I do think this was an opportunity to see how focusing on the basics of relationships and family and community engagement continue to be foundational in any mode of learning.
Yeah. So again, just it's so funny to seeing the mirror image of our experiences, because I'll just contextualize it on the school level. Our school has a policy now where every child, every family gets one phone call once a month, and we just ask if they have enough food at home, if they're able to take care of their mental health, and just having to call families. Most of the time we don't talk about that stuff. We just talk about what's going on with school, but I feel like it's really built this stronger, deeper connection between family and educators. And also is just helpful to make sure we're addressing the most fundamental needs.
I'm curious, have you all talked about if that's something that will remain in place next year?
Not yet. We're working on the April 5th transition, but I'm sure that will come up soon.
Yeah.
So I have a ton more questions, but I think I'm going to start transitioning now so the audience can ask their questions. Anna, do you want to take lead of that part?
Yeah. We'll go into the Q&A time now. So one of the first questions we got in the chat, David, go ahead and unmute yourself and you can ask Jackie your question.
Sure, thanks, Anna, and thank you so much, Jackie, for being here. I was wondering, given how new this world is that we're living in, especially in a profession that depends so much on personal engagements, like what you're talking about, that, you know, a lot of people nobody's really equipped for what we had to, you know, adapt to last fall. But I was wondering if between, you know, March of 2020 and the beginning of this school year, or even after, did DESE consider offering any trainings or just even opportunities for districts to share what had worked, you know, for adapting to the new world, just to facilitate that, you know, knowledge sharing?
Yeah. Wow. Yes. Yes and no. So I think that's been a goal and something that we've recognized can be really powerful. I will say that our Center for Instructional Supports, CIS, has been really great, like even back in maybe March, but certainly back last spring, started offering some share-a-thons, which were content and or grade level specific or grade range specific for that very thing, to say, come on, you know, I think they identified a handful of teachers that they were hearing were figuring some things out, and it, you know, opened it up to anybody who wanted to attend just to do that, to network, to collaborate. I think teachers were incredibly impressive at self-organizing this year as well. Social media blew up and was like the most cutting edge way to get that information, where I was plugging in just to see like what's going on and what great information is coming out now. And, you know, the state has played kind of a convening collaboration partner role in the past. I don't know if that's what we're known for. And so while we're happy to sort of provide some of those options, I think others found it in nonprofits and some of our funders and in some of the self-starters that were popping up along the way. I will also say that we, again, as the state level, our first level of contact is usually at the district or at the network level. So with our superintendents and our executive directors and our school committees, and really approach things at a systemic level. And so working, you know, through the top levels of that leadership is where we have had some opportunities to bring the supers together and to have some of those sharing opportunities. The biggest challenge to all of it this year has been two of the biggest challenges, I think, the pace of change and how quickly things evolve on a, you know, just hour to hour basis, would you say, still, as well as how in different places everybody has been throughout the year. And so, you know, maybe you were in person at one point and a lot of folks were fully remote versus others were hybrid, but not that kind of hybrid, a different kind of hybrid. And we're doing the simultaneous model while, you know, you're doing a different one. And so I think it's been hard to take the time out to even, you know, take a breather for it. So to some extent, yes, could have done better. Lots of challenges. Too long, didn't read version.
Thanks for your question, David. If you're just joining us, feel free to put your questions in the chat. There'll be extra time for questions later, but we'd love to hear from you. So one of our questions that came in through the Eventbrite, this person asked, how do you view the role of education nonprofits in responding to issues of equity during COVID?
Yes. So probably similar to how I saw it prior to COVID. At DESE as a state agency, as I think any individual partner, you think about a school or even a classroom, whatever the unit is. Well, I think we're doing a lot of great things. We certainly can't and don't do everything and cannot operate individually or independently of everybody. Education is a very complex system, and I think everybody has a role to play. I think, our nonprofit partners, especially in this region. So I've been in Illinois, I've been in Iowa, I've been in North Carolina, I've been in Indiana. And moving out to the greater Boston area, I was blown away by the number of partners in the education space. It's just really powerful to see so many people focused on education and truly making it a priority. And so I think it's really school specific, it's region specific, it's community specific. So I think continuing to being open to listening to our students and families and communities to hear what their needs are and really being responsive to that is one of the best ways that we all can move forward. I also think that while having a ton of players in the field is a huge asset, it also complicates things. There's so many nonprofits with so many different missions approaching the work in various ways. And I've always seen a big opportunity for stronger collaboration and inter-organization partnership to see the bigger picture. This is the role that we think we can play. We see all of these other folks and we think there's a role for them to play as well. How can we all operate together to make sure that we are truly working within the system and not, sometimes competing against one another or duplicating efforts to some extent.
All right. So our next question is going to be coming from Rita. Hey, Rita, go ahead and ask your question.
Great. And my question is for both Jackie and Jess. As a former high school teacher myself, I'm trying to wrap around trying to wrap everything around of what would my job look like now if I was still in the classroom. And Jackie, you mentioned that you do have teaching experience. So from both perspectives, Jess now and Jackie from DESE, would love to know if you can kind of put your thumb on what the daily activities or changes you think are happening with the teacher role. If there's anything sort of new that's being asked of teachers that maybe will shift their role permanently, or is just a new skill set or kind of new type of teaching that they're doing because it's remote or hybrid.
Froze. Sorry, I froze there for a second.
Oh, no worries.
Okay. I think I heard you, Rita, and I would love to defer to Jess first.
Okay, yeah, I have so many thoughts on this one. For those of you who came late, I'm a special educator in Salem Public Schools. Special education obviously has a slightly different spin on teaching. So one of the biggest things that I hope carries over is we've been having weekly meetings with paraprofessionals to help train them. And usually they just get thrust in all these different roles in the school. So it's been really, really nice to help make sure they feel comfortable on the online platforms and can appropriately help kids. We've been going over through those meetings after they got the swing of things at the beginning of the year. We've been talking about neurological profiles and why the kids respond to certain interventions and different supports they can provide and testing them out. So that's just been the biggest positive from my specific role as a special ed teacher. Let's see, I can try to think from the math and humanities teachers I've worked with as well. I think kind of what Jackie was talking about earlier about just technology being more accessible. It was such a burden for teachers to be able to casually implement just anything online because there wasn't easy access. The internet honestly still isn't great at my school, so that's a huge burden, but it's better and people are aware of it now. So it's been really nice for kids to just get used to basic tech things. The math teacher and I always are amazed that they really can't, the kids at the beginning of the year couldn't navigate Google Slides and those simple things. So just being able to easily implement that type of curriculum is essential.
There you go. And I would say that teachers have always been superheroes, and I think they've always been asked to do way more than what their job description has entailed, including like many of the things that Jess just described and described previously. A lot of teachers have been doing forever, maybe not in the context of virtual or remote learning, but have been, calling families to see if they're okay, and, doing neurological profiles for kids, whether or not it had a name, and, paying for supplies, and just filling a lot of gaps that kids have needed. What I think has been different about this year, and what I'm praying to whoever you pray to, if you pray, continues into next year, is that the world has gotten a good look at that. And I think has really developed a deeper appreciation for what teachers do and how hard it is. We've all seen the stories of parents who are sitting in the Zoom of the kids' classroom and seeing just how hectic it can be and how difficult it can be and how a teacher is doing a million things at one time. And just having kids at home and having to be the teacher in a lot of instances. I think parents developed a very quick appreciation for how hard that is. And so I'm really hopeful that aside from acknowledging that we're seeing schools receive more money than they have ever received since inception of public school systems. And one of the best arguments I've heard or comments I've heard on that is that schools have always needed this amount of money. We've always needed more staff members. We've always needed more counselors. We've always needed more nurses. We've always needed this, not just because it's a pandemic. And so I think hoping that this is a really good opportunity to make the argument that people development resources is something that we will continue to need moving forward.
All right. So our next question, Caroline Jones. Go ahead, Caroline.
Hello. Hi, Jackie. We met last spring. You may not remember me, which is fine. So I was on the teacher advisory cabinet last school year, which was just an amazing experience. And I'm wondering if, I put this question in the chat, I'm wondering if DESE has thought at all about, I heard you mention moving forward, maybe opening up like first space for the TAC and the PAC, the teacher advisory cabinet and principal advisory cabinet. I'm wondering if they would just open it up maybe for more voices, or I don't know, I just wrote a quick note, like a, for lack of a better term, I'm brainstorming like a post-COVID, like how to address disrupted learning and unfinished learning cabinet. I'm just wondering if that would help amplify teacher voice. Wondering what your thoughts are on that, or if there's been any discussion. Oh, is Jackie frozen?
I think she is frozen.
Okay.
Oh,
it looks like she's saying, yes, we're going to do that.
Right, yeah, it looks like she's just about to get on. We'll hang tight until she comes back. That's a great question though. Hold on to that.
I'd love to make a plug as a math teacher. So I am a 5th grade math teacher in Boston Public Schools. And I'm wondering if anyone in this group has used Desmos or uses Desmos. Yeah, it's so amazing. It's just built for math. And as a teacher who just came back last week to the classroom and more kids yesterday and Monday, like having them jump right into whiteboards, there's nothing like it. And I brought some dice and doing some kinesthetic activities, but Desmos has really been great and served me well from a planning standpoint. And I'm just wondering, if anyone else besides Jessica has used it. It's a lift to learn it, but it's really amazing, especially 6 to 8 math and high school math. But it's working for 5th grade. So I'm enjoying it, and so are the kids. And they've just learned so many tech skills that they wouldn't have otherwise learned at their young age, as at 10 and 11.
Yeah, I don't know about anyone else, but shout out to Desmos, because I don't know if you heard this too. I believe they're coming up with a more extensive curriculum. It's just so interactive. That's the greatest, and it's so wonderfully repetitive and conceptual at the same time.
All right.
Oh, poor Jackie. Okay, she's still not here.
She's probably working on getting back in.
Oh, and David also said that one of his tutoring students uses it at his school, which is great.
It's good. It's good. How about, let's do this. We can go into breakout rooms, and then once Jackie gets back, we have time for additional questions. So I'll split everyone up into, a random breakout room. It'll be about, 7 minutes. Go ahead, talk amongst yourselves. And what about the overview? Anything Jackie said, it's sticking with you. All right, so we'll get about 3 people per room.
Thanks, Jackie. Welcome back. I'm wondering if DESE has thought at all about possibly widening the teacher advisory cabinet for next year, or and the principal advisory cabinet, and possibly making a second one, maybe like to address specifically disrupted learning, unfinished learning, delayed learning. I'm wrapping my head around I'm committing to not saying learning loss, because I've just seen too many learning gains this year with our students at my school. So that's why I'm saying disrupted learning, delayed learning, unfinished learning is something I've always shared. It's just not finished yet. So I'm just wondering if DESE has thought about that, or maybe even focus groups to that point for next year.
A great question, and I can't speak to PAC and TAC specifically, but am more than happy to take that question back to the team and hear if they're thinking about this at all, both in terms of size and topic, and how they're thinking about next year. And outside of PAC and TAC, if there are any thoughts around just additional engagement strategies at the educator level. What I can share around unfinished teaching and learning and disrupted learning opportunities this year, we've adopted a similar mindset as you have. We actually just recently launched an initiative called the Academic Excellence Roadmap. And, as you know, and as other teachers in this room know, the idea of unfinished teaching and learning and students coming in with wildly different places is not a new challenge. Every year, teachers have to figure out where students are coming in at. Very rarely is it right at the beginning of this grade level, and never is it every single student. And so this concept is not a new one. This challenge is not a new one, but we are anticipating that it is much more widespread and much deeper heading into next year. So we're actually working with a vendor to create a series of guides, resources, and trainings around evidence-based practices to accelerate student learning. Again, we don't anticipate that the strategies included here are earth-shattering. it's great instruction, grade level content, high quality instructional materials, extra time, high dosage tutoring, and a variety of others, and what this looks like in different subject areas and grade levels. And what we really want to do is just elevate these practices and give some really easy to use resources and training opportunities to make sure that they're accessible to every single educator and system leader across the state. So we are getting underway with that work right now and hope to actually have those resources published in May and to kick off those trainings and professional development opportunities in June. So I believe that there will be a lot of great opportunities to collaborate and learn collectively on this specific area in just a series of weeks.
All right. How are the breakout rooms? Just give me a thumbs up, or down. Cool. Yeah, I hope everyone had, some good conversation. So we have additional time for more Q&A, but this concludes, the major portion of it. But we're going to stick around for about 10 to 15 more minutes just to have time to ask Jackie more questions. And so I'll pull another question from the Eventbrite. Before the breakout rooms ended, Jackie, we were talking about some of the uniqueness or not unique things about the school system there. But one of the questions from Eventbrite says, are the inequities facing the Boston education system unique to the city, or is there overlap with nationwide inequities?
Oh, interesting question. I think this is tough for me to answer for a few reasons. One, as I mentioned, am not from this region originally. And I know that in really any large city, such as Boston, there's so much context within the school system that's grounded in Boston's case centuries of information and history. And two, my position at DESE truly is a statewide position. And so I'm not as grounded in the day-to-day challenges that Boston as a district faces. I will say that, there are a lot of challenges that I do hear. Boston is by far our largest district, which large districts nationwide have really particular challenges. And in a moment like a pandemic, Anna and I were talking just about the concept of local control and how that has been an interesting thing to watch nationally and internationally during a pandemic, where you really wonder, in what places is it helpful to have a centralized decision-making, and in what cases is it important to have really local context and varied decision-making. And I think in big districts like Boston, that plays out all the time, where you have so many schools and so many students and so many communities that really are different, that sometimes having a large system can be really tough to pivot, should I say, in moments like the pandemic. And so I think that's been tough to address the truly unique needs of every school, every community, every system within the district. Has been a challenge this year. Would I say that it is Boston specific or something that we do see play out across the country? I don't know that I've heard of anything truly Boston specific that I haven't heard pop up in other large districts across the state. So somebody more well-versed in BPS might have a different sentiment, and I wouldn't be opposed to hearing that. But from a state perspective and even a somewhat national perspective, I think it's a big, diverse, complex system. And that's tough.
You said messy before, so there's definitely a lot of complexity, and with complexity comes a lot of messiness. We're gonna go to Scott. Scott has a question, and go ahead, Scott.
Hi, yeah. So one thing that's been a challenge this past year has been, I'm the father of a first grader, a kindergartner, when the pandemic started, kindergartners have a particularly hard time with remote learning because they can't read. So that was particularly interesting. And it required remote learning, requires like a lot of supervision, and that somebody has to be at home. And when I've been working in the past, like I've done that out of the house. In the pandemic, that hasn't been the case, but there's a lot of people who can't work from home, but then their kids don't have a place to go. So, what do you do? And I'm just curious to hear a reaction to that, because I haven't heard much of that coming from the schools or educational administrators or so on. In the district where I am in Newton, Mass, it has not been brought up at all. And the little bit of questioning I did around that kind of got shrugs. So yeah, be curious to hear your reaction.
One, I completely sympathize and empathize with you. My daughter, my oldest, is a kindergartner this year as well. And around the need for supervision, back in December, she had remote kindergarten art where they were cutting out snowflakes. And she, I would say inadvertently, but it was pretty intentionally, cut off half of her hair in a moment of not being supervised. To make light of what has been a truly challenging moment, just to share my empathy with you. And because I am so close to that perspective, was one of my biggest concerns all summer long, was it's not doable. The math doesn't work for this to work with parents of young children. And that's been one of my biggest perspectives, but there's a larger perspective with that, which is clearly around equity, right? Some parents do have the opportunity to be flexible, to hire nannies, to send their kids to really expensive daycares, which, some of which weren't even open this year, but most parents don't. And, a lot of parents had to make impossible decisions about childcare this year. For that reason, either missing out on work. We've seen reports about how many women in particular left the workforce this year for this very reason. And then you think about the kids themselves, and remote kindergarten might be manageable for some kids. I don't know, but I know that the vast majority, it's not a great learning experience. And so we knew that there was also a concern about students and what they were missing out on in truly pivotal years for them. And so, that's one of many reasons that the department, our commissioner, and the governor have been pretty unapologetic about pushing for in-person learning, particularly for our most vulnerable students. And, we think about our earliest learners, our students with disabilities, our English language learners, and our students that just need the in-person aspect in order to learn effectively. I will say that on a more local basis, some districts, some communities were really great about standing up remote learning centers pretty early on. We saw this in communities who had well-established community partnerships. Boys and Girls Club in particular was a national leader in this way. We did have some funders who were quick to stand up remote learning centers, learning pods in some form or another, and to fund that. National Parent Union, NPU. They were really big advocates and seeded grant money to stand up those centers as well to address this concern. And it hasn't been enough, and there were way too many communities that didn't have those partnerships to begin with, or didn't have partners available in their communities, thinking particularly out in Western Mass. And so it's another example of how inequities really reared their head over this past year. And hopefully you are very much aware of our most recent foot stomping of learning in person. And I shouldn't say foot stomping, our stamping of this, where all elementary students will be, all elementary schools will be required to offer in-person learning full-time starting on April 5th. Which I know many argued is really late, but we do feel really important that it is happening. So hopefully your child will be back in school in the near future, and again, just really empathize with the challenge of that this year.
Kind of jumping off of that, there was this question from the Eventbrite too, saying that some estimates say that a third of unemployment is directly related to childcare and virtual school support. So how can the education system regain trust with parents that relied on it when they didn't really get the support that they needed for over a year?
Yeah, this is a tricky one. And yeah, I certainly don't have the answer for this. I think we collectively as a nation perhaps have a lot of conversations to have in the coming months, and a lot of trust rebuilding from everybody's perspective. I was reflecting earlier today if I could give one piece of advice to anybody today, it is really just to remember to have some grace for everybody that you encounter. Our superintendents, our teachers, our school committee members, the governor, the commissioner, everybody has had to make truly impossible decisions this year with massive trade-offs, with massive implications at every turn. And nobody has made those decisions lightly. Nobody's sleeping these days. The weight of the world is truly weighing on everybody. And no matter what decision you make, there's just no right answer. And so, there's been a lot of division. There's been a lot of anger. There's been a lot of stress. And it's all understandable. It's hard not to empathize with every single person you talk to, even when they're on completely different ends of the belief system in what we should be doing right now. So, I hesitate to put this all on the school systems for not offering in person, because there are equity considerations for offering in-person learning, and so trading off of some of the resources that are going towards communities who prefer to stay remote because the pandemic has had a disproportional impact on them. And so, I think engaging in some empathy and again, just grace for all others is going to be critical moving forward, because a lot of trust has been lost in a lot of places. And so I'm hopeful that there will be a road to recovery, and I think it's going to start with, again, going back to building those relationships.
Mm-hmm. For sure. We just have another question pop in. Caroline, do you want to go ahead and ask that? Let me ask you to unmute yourself.
Jackie, I wonder if in some cases, without encouraging remote learning, because we know it's not the best option, I have quite a few students who have asthma and a couple that have diabetes. And I'm wondering, I know those families that I speak to a lot during the week are very concerned and scared. Without a pediatric vaccine on the horizon for August, September, will there be a remote option or hybrid option in some cases?
So really, really good and timely question. I have been scratching my head on this one for months now, being the person whose sole job it is to think about these things. And, we're having some department conversations about the world of possibilities for next year. We do feel pretty strongly that schools will have to continue to offer fully in-person options, you know, as long as there are no unexpected turns with the trajectory of the virus. But, you know, what is available for students who particularly due to medical concerns might still want or need a remote option is something that we're grappling with right now. And if you think back to before the pandemic, there were students who, due to medical reasons, couldn't attend school in person before. You know, students with compromised immune systems, students receiving chemotherapy, students with, you know, compound fractures who were in the hospital for a couple weeks at a time. And, you know, there are regulations, provisions that make sure that those students are able to continue receiving instruction. I would argue that we've learned a lot of things this year that we might be able to use to improve the services that we were giving before the pandemic. So I don't know exactly what that's going to look like next year, but know that it is top of our minds right now. I would also say, you know, for your families that might be concerned about this or who you might be concerned about, just know that there are some protections in the law for those medical requirements, but we're hoping that we can provide some additional guidance in the coming months.
All right. Before I kick it back to Jess, I'd be interested, Jackie, in hearing, is there, you know, something that really pleasantly surprised you throughout this entire year? It doesn't have to be super specific to, you know, your job, but something in your line of work that was a pleasant surprise that really encouraged you coming out of this, you know, pandemic?
Yeah, great question. I have always been just really, what's the right word? Impressed, tickled, just with the ingenuity of our students and just with young people in general. And I don't get to interact with students nearly, aside from my own, who I think we could all use some separation from, and my children's students. I don't get to interact with students nearly as much as I would like to these days, but the few interactions I do get, and even, you know, the YouTube videos that have gone viral, and, you know, all the social media stuff that is cooler than I can explain right now. I've just been really impressed with a lot of their reactions and responses to the pandemic, both in terms of creativity. Like, this isn't as funny for people who work in school systems as it might be to the students, but, you know, they've gotten really creative at pulling the virtual fire alarm and figuring out ways to get out of class and to get out of assignments. And, you know, we've heard superintendents calling us and lamenting about all of these interruptions. And as a former middle school teacher, part of me continues to think it's just a little funny that they're pivoting themselves in being middle school students. And even like figuring out how to pay not too much money for like a mini cyber attack, again, to like pull the proverbial fire alarm. So that's probably not the best example, but, you know, just, I don't know, they've been creative, they've been funny, they are learning all of life lessons right now, watching the world operate on a very virtual stage. And, you know, I think they're out of this with some demands that I think we all should probably pay attention to. So it all comes back to the kids.
Yeah, there's high schoolers and middle schoolers. I think mischief does not exit out of them just because they're online. All right. Hey, Jess, we're going to kick it back to you. You can close us out.
Awesome. Yes, just a huge thank you for Jackie. She has dedicated so much time to helping us learn more on a macroscopic level what's going on. So thank you so much for sharing your insights. We really appreciate it. Yeah, and thank you to everyone else as well for coming and engaging with this. It's such an important topic, and just, yeah, cannot thank you all enough.
Can because I'm on my phone and have really limited functionality, can somebody drop my work email into the chat? I always like to offer, if anybody ever wants to get in touch with me, please don't hesitate. I've loved hearing from you all tonight, and am always open to hearing your ideas, questions, and even just sharing your experience with me is really powerful. I don't know, this is going to be weird. Can I spell it out for somebody?
Yeah, I was going to say, I only have your personal, so yeah, spell it out. We got you.
It's JACQULYN .m .Gantzer GANTZER @mass.gov.
Got it.
Ooh, LYN.
Oh, typo.
Yeah, please reach out anytime. And thank you, Jess. Talk about it.
Thank you, everybody, again for coming. We so appreciate it. We'll send, if you've most likely registered from Eventbrite for this, you'll receive a recording. And please reach out to Jackie if you have other questions. But we completely honor the fact and respect the fact that you guys are here from 7 to 8:20 on a Wednesday night. So thanks again.
Yeah, totally. Have a great evening, everyone. Enjoy the night. If you're part of organizing this, feel free to stay on for just a few more minutes to finalize some things, and take care. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.